Great civilizations are not murdered. Instead, they take their own lives. I'm quoting from the BBC. That is the conclusion of historian Arnold Toynbee in his 12-volume magnum opus, A Study of History. It was an exploration of the rise and fall of 28 different civilizations. All right, according to the Times Standard, the average age of an empire is a mere 250 years. Join me in the Economic War Room, where we will take a hard look at the American empire, how and why it may be dying, and what we can do to save it. The Bible says it twice. Proverbs 22:3 and 27:12. A prudent man sees danger ahead and prepares for it, but the fool goes blindly on and suffers the consequences. Hey, in America, there's danger ahead. In fact, we're approaching our 250th birthday, the average age of an empire. In fact, there's a book, The Fate of Empires and the Search for Survival, written by Sir John Glubb. He walks through all of the great societies and civilizations of time, from Assyria to Britain. And you know the average age of duration? It's about 250 years. Now, why would the American empire fail? Well, maybe we can learn from history. Why did Rome fail? I'm going to quote from how hyperinflation destroyed ancient Rome. Currency debasement. That's the key. It's essentially the reduction in the value of currency achieved by the injection of excess money into a market. In the context of ancient Rome, we refer to it as the debasement of the denarius, the then Roman currency achieved by mixing precious metals like gold and silver with base metals like copper, and a reduction in the size of coins. You know, shrinkflation? All right. Whenever Rome faced a money crunch, the emperor, starting from Nero, would simply debase the coinage to pay debts, acquire resources, finance projects, and last but not least, enrich political insiders. As time marched on, more and more coins were pumped into the market, which progressively catapulted inflation to unsustainable levels. That's what we're seeing in Washington right now. Political insiders benefit. Our currency's backed by absolutely nothing, and they're producing more and more of it all the time. Now, what happened in Rome? The silver content of a Roman denarius dropped from 90 to 100%. 200 years later, it was virtually zero. Almost no silver left in a Roman denarius. That's debasement of the currency. Guess what? 200 some years ago, our currency was backed by gold and silver, and today, backed by nothing. And they're producing more than ever before. Is that going to harm us? Well, Vladimir Putin's buddy says yes. His name is Igor Panarin. I've quoted him before on this show. In 2008, there was a Wall Street Journal article. I'm going to quote from it. It says, Mr. Panarin posits in brief that mass immigration, economic decline, and moral degradation will trigger a civil war and the collapse of the dollar. His theory called U.S. foreign debt a pyramid scheme and predicted China and Russia would usurp Washington's role as global financial regulator. Hey, that's what the BRICS nations are doing right now. I'm going to quote from historian Alfred McCoy in the book, In the Shadows of the American Century, The Rise and Decline of U.S. Global Power. This guy's from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He says, the American century, proclaimed so triumphantly at the start of World War II, may already be tattered and fading by 2025. And except for the finger pointing, could be over by 2030. Some dire words, but he goes on to say, the coming 2020s are a demoralizing decade of rising prices, stagnant wages, and fading international competitiveness. McCoy blames decades of growing deficits on incessant warfare in distant lands. And by 2030, the U.S. dollar will lose its status as the world's dominant reserve currency, marking the empire's loss of influence. Well, those are dire words put in the magazine Big Think. He goes on and says, this change will prompt dramatic price increases for American imports. Costs on overseas travel for tourists and troops will increase as well. Washington will be forced to slash its budget, causing a pullback and shrinking of American forces. Like a fading superpower incapable of paying its bills, America will then be continuously challenged by powers like China, Russia, Iran, and others for control over the ocean, space, and cyberspace. Domestically, the changes in America's power will lead to a worsening of the standard of living, with skyrocketing prices and tensions that will lead to a major rewriting of the American social contract. Lest you think America's got it coming and it's about time it loses its world status, McCoy warns that whoever will take its place will not wield power in the comparatively benign and beneficent way that the U.S. has. Those are dire warnings. You know, the common theme among the demise of all once thriving empires? McCoy said it, Glubb said it, everyone says it. It's the reserve currency status and the debt. The outlook for America is, as a result, kind of grim. We're at our 250-year period, and we've got too much debt. Hey, look, I've got 4 decades in the investment industry. I was an economic warfare consultant in the Pentagon. I've written about these things since I graduated from college in 1983. I've got 4 best-selling books, including the latest, Pirate Money. They all talk about these themes. So how did we get here? We are right at the 250-year mark, and the real problem, we abandon real money, creating an unsustainable path that enriches a few and hurts the majority. You know, in our first 250 years, we found out that paper money was worthless in colonial days. We produced continental notes that weren't worth a continental, backed by nothing other than, you know, faith and confidence. What happened? Washington's troops at Valley Forge, they had no shoes. We were nearly bankrupt as a nation. It took a miracle to save us and win the Revolutionary War. So when they created the Constitution, they decided, we are never going to do that again. Washington said, paper money has had the effect in your state that it will ever have, ruin commerce, oppress the honest, and open the door to every species of fraud and injustice. He's talking about what happened in ancient Rome, too, isn't he? Jefferson said paper is poverty. Madison, the father of the Constitution, says paper money is unjust, it's unconstitutional, it affects the rights of property as much as taking away equal value in land. Bottom line is the founders hated paper. So what did they do? They put in the Constitution a provision that we would only use the dollar as our currency. Now, they didn't mean a dirty green piece of paper with George Washington's picture on it. I mean, how could they do that? What they meant was a Spanish milled dollar, 0.7734 troy ounces of fine silver. That was the coin of the day. They didn't want to use British farthings and shillings and pounds. They wanted to use Spanish milled dollars, measured in silver. And they also wanted to use gold coins called gold doubloons. In other words, the founders intended for us to use pirate money as the coin of the realm. How do we protect America? How do we get back to sound money? How do we get back to the things that allowed us to begin the American centuries and the 250 years of prosperity we've enjoyed? Well, we're going to cover all of that after we take a break. We'll be right back. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Oh, hi, I'm Kevin Freeman, and I'm here to tell you about coffee. Well, not really, but I'm going to use coffee to illustrate my point. Here we have several different coffees, each with its own unique characteristics. First, we have instant coffee. This coffee pretends to be coffee, but it's not really coffee at all. It's a fraud. Plus, it tastes terrible. I'm out. Next, we have woke coffee. Their coffee actually tastes pretty good, until you find out that when you drink it, you have to admit that you've oppressed other coffees in the past. Insanity. I'm out. Next, we have Big Tech Coffee. Now, these guys used to encourage folks to share with others what they thought about their coffee. But now, if you say you don't like Big Tech Coffee, they'll take away your coffee pot. I'm out. This brings us to Patriot Mobile Coffee, right? This is one big cup of truth and freedom. There's no fraud here. Patriot Mobile is America's real Christian conservative wireless provider. Patriot Mobile gives back millions of dollars every year to organizations that are on the front lines fighting for our freedoms. Patriot Mobile offers the best nationwide 4G and 5G coverage on the same networks as the other major carriers. So you'll get the same great coverage along with 100% US-based customer support while knowing you are supporting a company that shares your conservative values. Switch to Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
I've been reading about the miracle of America. There's a book, The Making of America. I took it out of my father's office. We were cleaning it out. He died last year. It reminded me of the old days when I would travel with him and I'd sit in classes and fill in the blank Dr. Skousen was teaching, and I was learning about where we got our Constitution, how it came about, what monetary sanity was, how we won the Revolutionary War in spite of financial insanity. You know, the founders, they didn't want us to have fake money or paper money. They wanted real money as quickly as possible. And so when they created the Constitution, they wrote about the dollar, a Spanish mill dollar, a piece of 8, 0.7734 troy ounces of fine silver. And you take that dollar and you cut it into 8 pieces. Each one was a bit, and that total was a piece of 8. And they also talked about gold and silver coin. Article 1, Section 10 of the Constitution mentions it. It says no bills of credit, which is unbacked paper money. They denied the states having it, and they never mentioned the federal government could have it. They intended it never to be used because the founders hated paper money. They wanted us to use gold and silver coins, pirate money. Now, I want to give you a little history of money in the United States over the last 250 years, because remember, great civilizations last about 250 years. So what's happened in America? We started off terribly, and we, as quickly as we could, when we established the Constitution in 1787, went to gold and silver coin. And it was Spanish coins, pirate money, a piece of 8 and gold doubloons. And so what happened is people found it inconvenient to carry around a bunch of coins with them. And so in the 1830s, banks, and in particular the Bank of Kentucky, it was established by the state of Kentucky. So it was a state-based bank. They said, hey, bring us your gold, put it on deposit, and we'll write out little notes like a Bank of Kentucky note. I've got one for 12.5 cents. That's 1/8 of a dollar. That's a piece of 8. And you could exchange that and use that as currency in any of the states. They'd take it because they knew the Bank of Kentucky was good for it. They had real gold and silver. It got challenged in the Supreme Court. Supreme Court ruled, nope, they've got real gold and silver behind it. They're able to exchange those notes for real gold and silver. So if you want them to keep your gold and silver safe for you and just carry notes in your pocket for convenience, absolutely you can do that. And a lot of banks did that. There was a lot of issuance of private money in the 19th century. But along comes the Civil War, and there's expenses beyond what governments want to have. So what do? They printed up a lot of extra money. In the North, they called them greenbacks because the back of the bill was green. It was fiat money. In the South, they had Confederate money. And boy, that lasted until the Civil War was over. But eventually people said, hey, this is terrible. It's not backed by anything. This is going to ruin society. And so there was a court case in the Supreme Court called Hepburn versus Griswold. It came out in 1870. No, it was not Katharine Hepburn versus Clark Griswold, but that is the first thing I think every time I read it. Bottom line, they said, hey, no unbacked paper money. The Constitution is clear. But guess what? Ulysses S. Grant packed the court the next year. Oh yeah, a Republican president, a war hero, packed the court the next year, and they came out and overturned Hepburn versus Griswold with a new court ruling called Knox versus Lee in 1871. And it basically said a government can print as much money as it wants to. It doesn't have to back it with anything. That is one of the worst Supreme Court decisions in the history of this nation, I believe. But the good news is the people revolted and they said, we want gold backing our money. Now, they didn't add silver. It was just gold. So they had a gold standard. It was a gold-only standard established in 1879, and that lasted for America and other major nations until about 1914. Most major nations of the world said, we will be on a gold standard. Now, wealthy people didn't like it all that much. I mean, wealthy people loved it, actually. People of modest income that weren't wealthy didn't like it all that much. We know that. You can go back and read the literature of the day. You can read the speech given by Democrat candidate William Jennings Bryan, don't crucify me on a cross of gold. And the reason that he said that is he wanted silver, which is more plentiful and cheaper and easier to own. He wanted that added back to the standard. It was such a popular concept that a guy named L. Frank Baum wrote a novel on it. You've probably heard of it, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. Yeah, they made a movie out of it. All right, so you've seen the movie, but you haven't read the book. If you've seen the movie, tell me, what color were Dorothy's slippers? Think about it. What color were they? Of course, you're going to say ruby. But you go back and read the book, and no, they weren't ruby. They were silver. Let me tell you what this book was really about. The Wizard of Oz, OZ, that's the abbreviation for ounce, the measurement of gold and silver as a precious metal. And what did Dorothy travel along? She traveled the yellow brick road. Follow the yellow brick road. And what did she travel the yellow brick road with? Silver slippers. In other words, it's a bimetal system to have both gold and silver. You know, there's a wicked witch. Who was the wicked witch? That was the bankers of the Northeast. And, you know, the wicked witch had some monkeys, flying monkeys that worked for her. Those are the lawyers that were forcing everybody to go along with the witch. But then you had the scarecrow, which is the farmer. You had the tin man, the factory worker. Then you had the teetotalers, also known as Toto, right? And you had the cowardly lion, who was William Jennings Bryan, fighting for the silver standard. And they went to the Emerald City, and maybe the answer is here. And they said, find the wizard. And they went, and there's this big curtain and a great Wizard of Oz. But you know, there was no power behind the curtain. Those were greenbacks. All of this is an economic allegory because people, 150 years ago knew what real money was. Okay, so they fought for it. We had a silver standard. It lasted until 1914. Why? Because in 1913, the Federal Reserve was created. There's a book called The Creature from Jekyll Island. I went and visited Jekyll Island to see where they hatched the process to create the Federal Reserve. You know, it was a dangerous process, and we're still living with repercussions of this banking cartel that is not owned by the federal government, but it has operated our economy pretty much since 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act passed. 1933, Franklin Delano Roosevelt confiscated gold because people were still using gold and said, we're no longer going to let the people have a gold standard. Although Federal Reserve notes were backed 40% by gold up until 1971. So the Treasury issued silver certificates, and you can still buy these in antique stores today. And it says this certificate allows the bearer to purchase $1 worth of silver. You turn it into the Treasury and they'll give you $1 worth of silver. Well, they ended that in 1971, too. In fact, in 1971, there was a temporary order from President Richard Nixon, and he ended dollar convertibility to gold, and he ended the ability to turn in Treasury notes for silver. And then he implemented wage and price controls. And this is the beginning of the end for an empire. From 1971 to the present, our debt, gross debt, was $405.9 billion. Today, it is approaching $35 trillion. That's what happens when you leave the gold standard. So here we are at 250 years. Is it all over for America, as historian Alfred McCoy suggests? Maybe. It sure feels like it, but don't give up hope. Before we get to hope, we're going to have to be realistic. Bottom line, in this book, I showed our debt at $32.1 trillion. That was June 24, 2023. You know, recently, it's almost $35 trillion. We've added $2.5 trillion to the debt in just a few months. This is scary. Interest only on this could ruin our budget. We're going to have to take another break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the problem a little more, but then we're going to come up with a solution. Here's a $10 bill. It's got the picture of Alexander Hamilton on the front of it. You know, it's kind of sad. When I was 10 years old, everything that I could buy for $1 now costs about $10. That's the cost of inflation. It's just paper. It's not backed by anything. You can't exchange it for gold and silver. You used to, but you can't do that anymore. And that's unfortunate. You know, pirates wouldn't accept this. Pirates, they wanted gold and silver. Patriots, the founders of this nation, also wanted gold and silver coin. In fact, they put a provision in the Constitution, 17 words, that said states could only make gold and silver coins tender within the states. That's why I wrote this new book, Pirate Money, Discovering the Founders' Hidden Plan for Economic Justice and Defeating the Great Reset. It will explain exactly the history of money and exactly why gold and silver coins can be made modern with new technology and a useful monetary system. PirateMoneyBook.com.
I'm Kevin Sorbo. When you spend money, you consider who you're buying from and the causes they support. If you don't, then you're likely supporting companies that are trying to destroy our country and take away our freedoms. Patriot Mobile is America's only Christian conservative wireless provider. They're a cell phone company and a good one. They offer nationwide coverage on the best 4G and 5G networks along with 100% US-based customer support. But here's the deal. Patriot Mobile's mission has nothing to do with cell phones. They carry out their mission by giving back millions of dollars every year to Christian conservative causes that are actively engaged in the fight to save America. Voting is no longer enough to beat the woke. We have to band together, support like-minded companies, and vote with our dollars. That's how we win. Stop supporting companies that want to destroy America and join Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
In a previous episode, I told you about the 5 undeniable truths. The first one was, our debt path is unsustainable. Jerome Powell says that. He's the head of the Federal Reserve. I'm quoting him. He said that in the long term, the government is on an unsustainable fiscal path, which means the debt is growing faster than the economy. That's how empires die. The Office of Management and Budget and every reasonable economist, anybody who looks at the debt says, yeah, of course it's unsustainable. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office says our U.S. debt in 10 years will top $54 trillion. And that was from February 7th of this year. $54 trillion in 10 years. And that may be understating it. Why? Because you could eliminate every federal department, agency, and every federal employee, including the military, and still not be able to balance the budget. Why? Because the interest on our debt, combined with Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security, all that mandatory spending, that's going to add $100 trillion to our deficit over the next 30 years. So we have $35 trillion today. It'll be $135 trillion at minimum in 30 years. And by the way, let me tell you, those projections assume 4% growth and very low interest rates. They're not realistic. Bottom line is we're facing an unsustainable death path. We also have other nations targeting our currency, which means they want to take us down from being an empire. We have inflation, which destroys empire. And we have governments intending to weaponize currency. And our money is changing in many ways. Those are the 5 undeniable truths that we have covered in previous shows. Bottom line is we're facing a real problem. You know, in 1971, when we left the gold standard, I could buy everything I wanted for a little over $1. A Hershey bar for a dime, a cheeseburger, fries, and a shake, and a Slurpee, everything I wanted. Go to the movies, it was all right there. Unfortunately, that's no longer the case, and it's led to an extreme wealth gap. So this is the bad news. We're discussing the end of empires and how these 5 undeniable truths match ever so closely with the circumstances that ended prior great civilizations. So what do we do about it? Well, we're going to have to stop the fact that the government plans to address it by weaponizing the currency. You've heard of central bank digital currencies, where it's not your money, it's the government's money that they let you use if they like what you're doing. Think of a parent who gives a credit card to kids, but says it's only useful for this, this, or that. You can't use it for anything else. Now, as a kid, my dad gave me a Texaco card. He said, I only want you buying gas with this. But when I was hungry, and in college, I found out you could go to Texaco and you could buy snacks. So I did buy some snacks, and I bought some ramen noodles, and I made it through, a few extra days using the credit card. And some entrepreneurial friends of mine would take their dad's gas credit card, and they'd fill their friend's gas tank up and take the money from it. Well, this is going to be so completely controlling and so completely parental with central bank digital currency that you won't have a choice. Just imagine it's like your fingerprints on every piece of money that you use. Now, people tell me, hey, look, electronic money, everything I do is electronic. My debit card, my everything, I tap to pay, I use my watch and everything. How is that different? It's different is that your fingerprint is on every piece of money. They know everybody who's using it everywhere at all times, and they can turn it on or turn it off if they like what you're doing or not doing. Now, if you want to read about that, look at Executive Order 14067 from President Biden that came out March 9th, 2022. It's 37 pages long. It spends more than half of that on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and climate change and progressive agenda. Yes, the left has talked about cutting off the bank accounts of people who disagree with the agenda of the big government. Trudeau's finance minister said if you're a Trump supporter, you ought to have your bank account taken away. Remember that? Or how about the debanking of Nigel Farage in England, or Tucker Carlson here, or our friend Nick Vujicic here? Bottom line is, we're facing a major change in money. And it's not just the changes we've seen in the past 20 years, like PayPal and Venmo and Tap to Pay and Apple Pay and Bitcoin and FedNow and all that. No, coming forward, they're moving to central bank digital currency. They call it the cashless future. They say it's here just like Big Brother. They monitor every transaction. So how do we fix this? How do we save the American empire? First, I don't want an American empire. The founders, when they wrote the Constitution, you know what they wanted? They wanted individual states that operated together in regard to common currency, operated together in regard to common defense and general welfare. But they did not operate top down from a central government in Washington, D.C., controlling everybody and everything. How do we solve this? By returning to our roots. The Constitution was written for a group of united but unique states. I'm going to quote the father of the Constitution, James Madison, who said, "The powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those which are to remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite." In other words, more power was supposed to be in the states than in the federal government. That's in Federalist Paper number 45. The beauty of the Constitution is that the power can be reverted to the states where the federal government has failed. Texas is protecting its border, and that's an example where the federal government hasn't got its act together, but other states have come on board and said, hey, Texas, we'll join you in protecting the border. The Constitution even allows for a compact of individual states to be formed to stop an invasion when the federal government fails. And that's what we're talking about here. The Constitution says, Article 1, Section 10, no state shall make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. I'm not suggesting we eliminate the U.S. dollar, just offering a valid choice for Texas and at least 24 other states that have read the book Pirate Money and are looking at. We have legislators calling us every week saying, can you help us in our state, Tennessee or Kansas or Iowa or Alaska or Florida or Louisiana or Kansas or Oklahoma or Arizona. They're all calling us and saying, I read the book Pirate Money. States can have their own money. That's extraordinary. How do we do it? Now, we're not suggesting a banking replacement. States should not enter the banking business. But we are talking about states having their own currency as gold and silver, according to Article 1, Section 10, and making it electronic so it's useful. Read the book, Pirate Money. This is the exact description of how we can return power back to the states and hopefully save America from the same ruin that so many of those other civilizations went through. Now, I'm not suggesting that we do anything other than what other nations are doing. Did you know that major nations of the world are stockpiling gold? The BRICS nations, China, the global central banks in Europe and Asia, they say gold as an international reserve. It's not a barbarous relic anymore. It's a real reserve currency. And you know, individuals are buying gold too. Costco is selling gold bars, and they're selling out within a few hours. They're tapping into precious metals, silver and gold. Costco sold $100 million. Why are people buying it? Because they are worried about the future. What we're offering is a plan that can provide economic safety and economic justice and solve some serious tax problems that people are facing. The technology is already there. You can read all about this in the book Pirate Money. And even Texas has a bullion depository already set for this. The courts have ruled on it multiple times that it's acceptable. And guess what? We can have it now. Read all about this in your free economic battle plan. Get it at economicwarroom.com. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.